When playing characters such as Zhao, Xiangling, and Beidou, many players ask the question, how much energy recharge should I build? Although this is a fair question, it's the wrong approach to solving energy
Wow.
problems.
Where did
A
that come
better
from?
question to ask would be, how can I play to build less energy recharge? In this guide, we'll teach you how energy works in Genshin Impact. You'll also learn a few practical tips and tricks on how to use elemental bursts off cooldown, even without building large amounts of energy recharge. This video was made in collaboration with Genshin Academy, a dedicated group of guide writers and theory crafters for Genshin's Russian community. Elemental bursts cost energy. They can range from 40 to 90 energy to cast on our current roster of characters. And there are a few ways to gain energy. The main source of energy is particles. They can be pyro, cryo, or any other element, and even dendro. There are also clear particles, which are not attributed to any element, as well as particles of larger sizes, called orbs. Where do these particles come from? Using a character's elemental skill is the main source of particles. When an elemental skill hits an enemy, a certain number of particles are generated. It's important to note that the particle generation occurs if and only if at least one enemy was hit by the elemental skill. The amount of particles generated by an elemental skill varies for each character. Usually, the higher the skill's cooldown, the more particles it generates, but there are exceptions. Some characters even have their own nuances. For example, Beidou generates more particles if she successfully parries. Razor and Zhao don't generate particles during their elemental bursts, and some characters can't generate particles at all. You can see the list of characters and their particle generation in the spreadsheet linked in the description. The second source of particles is monsters. When their HP reaches certain thresholds, a particle or orb is created at their location. Generally, elite monsters will drop more particles and orbs than standard mobs. Again, you can find the details in another spreadsheet in the description. The last source of energy particles is from special passives external to characters. For example, weapons from the Favonius series can generate clear particles on critical hits. There's also electro-resonance, which generates one electro particle with a 5-second cooldown when superconduct, overload, or electrocharge occur. Now that we've figured out where particles come from, how much energy do particles give? And most importantly, to which character in a party? Particles and orbs give energy to all characters in the party. However, each character gains different amounts. It's dependent on several factors, and exact values for different situations can be found on this table. Don't worry, you don't need to memorize all of these numbers, and you only need to know a few fundamental facts. 1. The character on field when a particle is caught gains 2/3 more energy than off-field characters. This principle is very often used in practice, so make sure you understand this. Let's say you have Xiangling in your party. Use Bennett's elemental skill to generate particles and swap to Xiangling to catch those particles. This method, called funneling, allows for high-cost elemental bursts to be charged much faster. 2. If a character receives energy from a particle that matches their element, then the character will gain 3 times more energy. The elemental skills of pyro characters will generate pyro particles, cryo characters generate cryo, and so on. A character that catches a particle of their element gains 3 times more energy than if they had caught the particle of a different element. That's why Bennett is used to generate particles for Xiangling, since they're both pyro characters. It's worth mentioning that there are also clear particles, which give the same amount of energy to characters of all elements. It's less than the particles of the same element, but more than particles of a different element. The last factor that influences the amount of energy gained from particles is the energy recharge stat, or ER for short. It's pretty simple. The amount of energy gained from particles and orbs is multiplied by the receiving character's ER. Each character is affected by their own ER stat, meaning when a character catches a particle, their ER does not affect off-field characters. Instead, the off-field character's individual energy recharge will be considered. Now let's move on to the second way of gaining energy. So far, we've been talking about elemental particles and orbs. In addition to them, there are effects that restore energy directly, called flat energy. These include all effects that say regenerates X amount of energy. For example, Ame no Makageuchi's weapon passive, the 4-piece effect of the Exile artifact set, and Jean's Ascension 4 talent, to name a few. In addition, normal and charged attacks on hit have a chance to give on-field characters 1 flat energy. This way of restoring energy is pretty inefficient, but this is a useful reminder if you're just a little bit short on energy to cast your elemental burst. All of these flat energy effects share one important property. They are not affected by energy recharge. Yes, you heard that right. ER does not increase the energy gained from flat energy, except when it does. Remember, ER only affects energies from particles and orbs. Flat energy goes straight into a character's burst meter. Now that we've established the mechanics, how do we use them in practice? Characters such as Xiao, Beidou, and Eula have strong elemental bursts. Their team comps often include a battery. This is a character of the same element whose main purpose is to generate energy for another character. A good example of a character that generates a lot of particles is Oz. He's often paired with Beidou. Other characters, rather than generating a steady stream of energy, give several particles in a short time frame. In these cases, you swap to your desired character to catch the particles. In addition, batteries often use special weapons. For example, sacrificial weapons allow holders to use their elemental skill an additional time, effectively doubling their particle generation. There are also the Favonius weapons that have a chance to generate 3 clear particles on critical hits. Sacrificial weapons are best on characters whose elemental skills have a very long cooldown since they generally create more particles. For characters with a shorter elemental skill cooldown, the Favonius series could work much better as they proc the passive more often. Additionally, because Favonius weapons generate clear particles, they're typically more effective than the sacrificial weapons when you need to battery a character of a different element. On the contrary, sacrificial weapons allow batteries to create extra elemental particles, and thus they are best on characters of the same element as your carry. While using these weapons, keep in mind that their effects cannot trigger while the holder is off-field. For example, if Fishful has a 100% crit rate with a Favonius warbow, Oz will not be able to trigger the passive while Fishful is off-field. This is a general rule for all weapons. All passives that proc when an event criteria are met can only be triggered when the weapon holder is on field. The exceptions to this are the royal weapons and abilities that explicitly state they can be triggered off-field. Alright, back to energy. The last technique that we will discuss is catching particles after casting an elemental burst. As you may have noticed, particles can take time to reach a character. While particles created by an elemental skill are flying, you can cast your elemental burst using all of your energy and then catch the incoming particles into an empty burst meter. This method is called pre-funneling. You can go further and combine this with the use of battery. For example, Sucrose generates elemental particles, then Xiao uses his elemental burst and catches the particles into an empty burst meter. This is a very important technique, especially for energy-hungry characters. You can go even further and catch particles from several skills at once. However, in this case, it is important to know that the elemental bursts of different characters consume energy at different times. There are cases when an elemental burst is cast but the energy hasn't been consumed yet, and because of that, the particles are wasted. An extreme example of this is Eula. It takes 1.5 seconds from casting her burst before her energy is consumed. You can view energy consumption timings in the 3rd spreadsheet in the description. In Xiao's case, his elemental burst consumes energy about half a second. Unfortunately, this is pretty long and it makes it difficult for Xiao to catch particles from more than 1 or 2 elemental skills. But there is a way to solve this problem. You can increase your distance to the particles so that they spend more time flying. It's almost impossible to use this in real combat, but Xiao can do it. Look closely. Sucrose can control the spawn location of particles by dashing. Create the particles behind you and use Xiao's elemental skill to dash forward. He'll move far enough from the particles created by Sucrose to catch them after he consumes his energy. In the end, let's answer the question you watched this video for. How much energy recharge should I build? This is a very difficult question to answer succinctly. The required amount of ER depends on the role of the character, the team comp, and how well you use the techniques shown in this video. But still, we'll show you the approximate ER values so that you can get a general idea. The values on screen are the ones that we end up seeing most commonly. Depending on various factors, they can be lower or higher. Please leave a comment and tell us whether you want to watch more videos like this on fundamental topics such as energy recharge and elemental reactions. We would also like to express our gratitude again to the folks over at Genshin Academy for making this video. You can check out their Russian-speaking community in the description below.